All right, time for another DraftPhysics.com, debatephysics.com also, but no one to debate. Nothing. It's just, it really is terrible that you can't find anybody to reasonably or rationally defend the crappy physics. And, you just have to keep doing this over and over and over again and saying, come on, there's no counter argument. Realistically. Alright, so just before we get to the videos of degrasse Tyson making a mess out of something very simple. So physics just keeps lying about this experiment and, what can be rationally figured out if you spend a little time analyzing it. So Newton did these two experiments. Opening single impediment, found this fringe pattern. Okay. And he didn't know what to make of it, so he didn't make anything of it. Okay, so it's kind of that simple. Didn't have a great explanation, figured it's some sort of diffraction thing, whatever. I think he probably said, yeah, the surfaces are probably causing it. But anyway, so that was in the 1690s or whatever. And then, in the 1801, Young comes along and does the same experiment with the catch. Okay, so he puts, it's basically an impediment and an opening. And the trick of when he did it is he made these openings really so small that they sort of negated the distance between the surfaces. So it was basically a single slit experiment because he made the point sources so close. And that's the thing you can figure out. It's just about point sources. The math uses the distance between the surfaces in the math. Okay, so when they're doing a double slit, they do the widest opening. Okay, and that'll give you these little red dots. And the smallest distance will tell you how big the envelope will be, what these little dots are contained in. And that's the simple truth. The waves would have to be right on the surface. Nobody would put the waves right on the surface that is overlapping the edge of the impediment. It doesn't make any sense. Waves don't form that way. They always talk as if there's two waves. Well, there isn't two waves that create this complex pattern. There's actually four sources. The outside source, lots of wavelengths of difference, lots of places where there's a full wavelength of difference, little tiny dots. Very close surfaces means very few places that there's a wavelength of difference. And this really should be viewed on a circular screen because it really should be equidistant. And the fact is there's a set number of these places where you can have a wavelength of difference. There's essentially a pattern going this way and a pattern going that way. That's why there's a double maxima in the middle. There's two of these nodes overlapping, and that's what's causing the double maxima. Water doesn't do that. Two waves won't do that. It's not a wave theory. Okay, wave theory doesn't work. A scatter theory works just fine. The photons come in, they get scattered at the surfaces, that is, the pieces broken, and then all you do is recombine them, and you got a 50-50 chance of them being back in phase. 50-50 chance. Where they're in phase, you get a photon. Where they're out of phase, no photon. Not complicated, really. It's so simple. And this is the foundation of their great mystery of physics and the reason they have to create superpositions and entanglements and antiparticles and many worlds and multiverses and all that crap because they can't honestly interpret a simple experiment. All right. And so this hype and bullshit that degrasse promotes. So this is his remake of Carl Sagan's Cosmos show. So he's going to do this terrible butchering of his mentor's pride and joy, and he's going to basically just, he's going to step on the shoulders of the giant. He's not going to stand on him. He's going to stomp on his shoulders.
The answer to that question of whether light was a particle or a wave would prove to be complicated. Now enter Thomas Young.
So this is his drawing of the light thing, and you can see he's got a double maxima here in the center. Now, even though it doesn't come to there as a double, it's double. So isn't that kind of strange? The drawing is kind of a weird mistake in a way, right? You're arguing, well, how do you, what's this? What are you drawing stuff the wrong size for? But water waves don't do that. So water waves make equally spaced, equally sized fringe patterns.
The man who exposed the enigma at the heart of light and unraveled the fabric of the cosmos.
So he didn't do any of that, okay? He did nothing more than what Newton did. And the difference is he had a hypey, wavy theory as an explanation versus a more sensible, well, let's look at it and try to figure out, oh, it's light. Light creates point sources. Light comes from points. Two headlights, becomes one headlight at a distance. These are all things we already know. So yeah, there's 2 point sources in a location. There's only a certain number of places you can make the triangle where the hypotenuse of the triangle is a full wavelength longer. And, there's not an infinite number of these. You shouldn't be viewing it on an infinite plane. You should be viewing it on a curved surface. I mean, little simple, obvious things.
That we thought we...
And then, in waves, the pattern goes all the way. The pattern goes all the way 90 degrees that way. No photon experiment has ever shown the photons to go more than, past 76 degrees or so. So no indication that it goes all the way to the zero.
New.
So all this hype, all this drama, just complete bullshit.
Come with me to one of the greatest mysteries in the history of science.
So, and again, it's not all that mysterious, frankly. They just didn't care to really analyze it and think about it and figure out, well, why does this math work where I've put the wave center on the surface? That math works. The wave on the, not the wave in the middle. If I use the middle of the opening and I put the wave center in the middle and I use that math, I'm not going to get the right answer. Not going to happen.
It's a story about a man who could do just about anything, and Thomas Young did.
So this is just, what is all this hype? This is just such hype. He was a scientist. He was a really good, he was a medical doctor, did a lot of stuff with color blindness and different subjects. So very interesting guy, very good, but not exemplary compared to all the other scientists, okay? And it's just because of the woo he was able to create. So this is sort of like the Chardonnay creating the woo over the MV squared nonsense. It's just hype. There's nothing dramatic in the experiment itself. It's so simple.
For 1,500 years, no one had been able to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics. By identifying 6 major sounds that the hieroglyphics represented, he was able to decrypt 6 of the symbols.
The Rosetta Stone, blah, 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 blah. So again, this is nothing to do with the subject, which is kind of also disappointing. All right, continuing. So, he was a sound engineer too. So he was a doctor, and he dealt with people with vision and sound, and so that's why he's big on the whole wave theory. And it just happens to be wrong. It doesn't work. If it was waves, again, the argument is that it's supposed to be going to all these locations. So the pattern shouldn't be, 70 bars and then it just dies out. It should continue, and it doesn't. Waves don't work.
Which led to the complete translation of the ancient Egyptian language by others. He was the first to chart the family tree of the Indo-European languages. As a physician, he identified a deformity in the shape of the eye, the defect of vision he named astigmatism.
Sorry, I didn't realize there was all this crap in there.
But it was Young's design of an experiment that sent physics down the rabbit hole we still...
So this is, there's no rabbit hole. It's just a really simple experiment. And if they did any thinking at all, they would have gotten the right answer. And again, his version is so crude. No laser beam, no monochromatic light. I mean, lots of errors, so to speak.
Live in.
And they're going to reenact something that can't be reenacted because even with all of the compiled notes that Young took, there's really no illustration of the actual experiment.
It looks simple, right? How could 3 sheets of cardboard set such a catastrophe in motion? A green glass shade like this one will only allow the green light through. so that only a single color or frequency of light will pass through the slit.
So, like I said, where he got this from, okay, Veritasium, in researching Young's notes, couldn't find this experiment anywhere.
Why was that important? Because he assumed that the many overlapping colors would result in the same light waves that Huygens imagined, called an interference pattern. He forced that...
Yes, so again, he's bringing up Huygens, and again, when Newton did these experiments, he already saw fringes. It's not a new phenomenon.
Single color of light to travel through two separate slits to see what kind of pattern the light would make on that last piece of cardboard.
So you can sort of understand, the thinner you make, so let's call this the forced surface experiment. Obviously, if you made a very thin impediment, or you make the slits really thin, that basically you're eliminating two of the sources, because those two sources will essentially be from the same location. That is, they can't create any interference because there's no way to make the triangle where the hypotenuse is longer than the other side of the triangle. So it's impossible to have fringes if you have two point sources very close to each other. And so there has to be a minimum distance between them for you to start to create fringes. And the wider the distance between two sources, two surfaces, the more fringes it is capable of creating. That's the truth of it.
If light was a particle, you'd expect to see two distinct clumps of light in the opposite wall.
So again, they're millimeter apart. Why would you expect the millimeter apart light to be spreading? The one slit doesn't go this way and the other slit send the light that way. That doesn't happen. They both spread the same way, and when they're that close together, less than a millimeter apart, obviously whatever the pattern difference would be right on top of each other. So you would expect to just see the same thing no matter what light you shined it through. Whatever slit you shined it through, you get the same pattern because the overlap is less than a millimeter. So they can't even describe the simple physics accurately. What your expectations should be at the real scale of the experiment, which is you're starting with a thing that's a millimeter apart and you're creating a visual pattern that's a foot long. Obviously, it's a gigantic amplification.
Where the individual particles of light ended up after they passed through the slits. But that's not what happened.
Millimeter apart slits. So this is just such a cruddy pattern, right? Because there's different colored light has to do this sloppiness. Okay, if you do the experiment correctly, it's not going to be this ugly. So that's just a fact. So obviously he did use sunlight. And in sunlight, you get a separation between the blue and the red bands. And so you have a tougher drawing to draw.
Instead, a completely unexpected pattern.
All right, so he says completely unexpected, yet Newton did the experiment. So it's already well established that you can create fringes by putting light against surfaces. And there really does have to be two of them.
The one that two waves would make when they overlapped or interfered with each other.
So they wouldn't make this. They wouldn't make these bars, okay? You wouldn't get the repeating pattern. You'd get one consistent pattern of the two waves interfering. Obviously, this pattern is not about two waves. It's about four sources. So again, just wrong, inaccurate, fake, phony, a fake description of the experiment, a fake description of the guy doing the experiment. It's all just made up physics. It's a lie. The physicists are just liars. They're trying to sell you on something, and so they're making up this whole big, let's simulate Jesus walking on the water. They're forcing it to be a reality when the facts don't indicate it's real.
That's why they're called.
So again, and he's showing these as if these are waves. What kind of waves come out this way? What are these bizarre-looking waves? Those aren't round waves. Those aren't Huygens waves. Whose waves are these weird-looking things? So what does this simulation have to do with anything real? Oh, that's right. It has nothing to do with anything real.
An interference pattern. Young had demonstrated that light was actually a wave.
So he didn't demonstrate any such thing. He demonstrated pretty decisively that light isn't a wave because the pattern's limited. It only goes a certain distance. It doesn't go where it's supposed to go. The bars get lighter and lighter and lighter as they go out. If it was water, it would get just as strong. You know, at 45 degrees, the wave is going to hit the surface with the same intensity that it's going to hit going forward. It doesn't have, it's missing all kinds of things. It doesn't have this double maxima problem. Water doesn't create that. So again, it misses in so many ways. And they just lie about it. A single slit produces no interference pattern. Obviously, a single slit in light, the two surface experiment, creates a ton of fringes. That's what Newton figured out. And the smaller and smaller you make an aperture, the more and more little waves, the more bullseyes you're going to get, the more rings you'll get. I mean, it's all old physics. I said that wrong. The smaller and smaller you make it, the fewer and fewer you get. The wider you make the aperture, the more rings you get, but they're in a smaller space.
That Newton, the greatest genius in the history of science, was half wrong. That light was not a particle as he...
So again, a corpuscle, as he described, a clump, okay, and Newton's the real quantum guy. He's basically saying, look, it's a clump. It comes in pieces, in clumps. Yeah, he had it right, and he's not half wrong, and this certainly doesn't prove him half wrong. So again, just more nonsense. Again, Newton saw these fringe patterns.
He had confidently proclaimed.
I mean, Newton drew all of this out with lenses and pieces of glass. He put layers of glass together, got these fringe patterns. Then he figured out how a lens works, you know, because of the way the fringes were created when he put light at different angles into the lens, and he got the fringe pattern in different locations. So he analyzed this very well. And this is just, you know, again, they're just slandering Newton and, you know, lying about what is a reasonable explanation for what the experiment shows. They're pretending it's impossible to describe this any other way but their silly wave way. And their wave way doesn't work. Two waves can't create the double slit pattern. Impossible.
There's a reason that arguments from authority hold little weight in science.
Jesus, amazing, amazing, amazing. Damn. I mean, in this, you know, in this environment where these assholes tell us what we must believe, they've proven it's the most proven theory in the history of mankind. It's just such frickin' hyperbolic dishonesty.
Nature and nature only settles the argument. And she has so many tricks up her sleeve.
So again, yeah, there's no tricks, okay? It gets dumber and dumber the further away you go down. The universe gets simpler and simpler, made out of simpler and simpler machines, devices. So this whole thing, they're anti-evolution, they're anti any kind of rational, deterministic cause and effect understanding of reality. They're just selling a religion with a chaos god instead of a moronic, sadistic, cruel god. It's a god with no brain. And that's all. It's just a God with no brain, but it's still God.
Only a fool would ever consider our understanding of nature complete. Newton.
And how much do they talk as if we know it had to happen this way? Einstein has to be right. Newton has to be wrong. I mean, come on. They're just so dishonest. Such duplicitous hypocrites.
Had missed something fundamental.
So he didn't miss anything. Okay, yeah, he didn't know what electrons and protons are, and he certainly couldn't know everything he could about forces. Now let's understand, by the time some of this stuff was discovered, that is, by the time they figured out the speed of light and different things, so Newton was aware of that. This was already when Newton had other jobs. I mean, he's working for the Mint, he's doing other things, so he wasn't doing Newtonian physics anymore.
Surprising. But we haven't gotten to the really disturbing part yet.
So isn't that just a grotesque setup for more nonsense? So he's already mischaracterized the history, and now he's just going to make up complete stories about experiments they never did. So hopefully this segment is about that willier part.
Scientists, in their never-ending fascination with light, set out to devise ways of isolating smaller and smaller units of it. It proved to be the passageway through the looking glass. It was the crossing of a threshold into a wonderland.
So again, this is somehow science, okay? Make up a simulation, make some sort of image that has something to do with a photon. It's doing this kind of crap, right? So the elemental universe is made of these complex machines that are doing some sort of Star Trekian warp drive bullshit. I mean, it's just so bad. It's worse than Horton Hears a Who. I mean, that's a nice little kid story, you know. But I mean, you don't believe that stuff is true.
Where the known rules of physics do not apply.
Oh, just, Jesus.
For the first time, they were able to isolate the tiniest unit of light. A single photon.
All right, so another lie. So they did this experiment. I think the earliest version is somewhere in the 1800s, but who knows? And the idea is you take a light source, like a gas flame or some other consistent source, and you put a bunch of filters in front of it. And the idea is you're putting a bunch of clouds in front of it. You're trying to diminish the amount of light until there's just a single photon in the environment. Well, the problem is that you're not blocking the light that way. You're blocking the light by shoving surfaces in front of the light. You're just putting surfaces all over the place for the light to be interfered with by the surface. That is, for the light to be, the photon to be broken in the sense that it's going to shoot off in one piece of it. It'll shoot off in this direction. The other piece is going straight. The other piece is going in some other direction. So you're scattering the light. So you have a ton of the pieces of a photon still in your experiment. There's a ton of pieces flying because you haven't blocked the photons. You've just broken their arrangement. And now you can rearrange the little pieces. You can put them back in phase, essentially. A crooked angle just means that you've changed the phase. When it goes in a straight line, it hits at a certain time. If it goes on a longer line, it hits later. So you've broken the phase by changing the location that it hits. And that's all you've done. You haven't gotten rid of the photon's energy. You've just broken the pattern. And the fact is you can scatter it and then recreate the phase by putting the stuff back in phase that you broke the phase of. So obviously this isn't a single photon experiment. It's a lie. They don't have a single photon gun, and there's no other way to make a reduced amount of light except to put filters in front of the light. And that isn't stopping photons. It's just breaking the photons.
And to perform Young's double slit experiment on a whole new level, tracing its precise path either through the right slit or the left slit.
So another pile of crap about any tracing. So there's only, in the 1929s, when they used electrons, they weren't using slits. So that's a dishonest comparison. And then later, when they did this double slit by using the which way mirror crystal thing, that's a completely different experiment also. So to imply that that experiment is a detector experiment is really reaching, because there is no detector. There's no thing that says yes photon, no photon. And it's just, you have to take their word for it that, they saw a photon over here, and then 10 meters away, they detected the same photon. Now, if you believe that, you're pretty silly.
We'll pull over to the side of the road for the best possible view of which slit, the right or the left, the photon passes through to get to the far wall.
So there's absolutely no experiment that does anything like this, detecting which slit the photon went through. Doesn't happen, and as I've already pointed out, even if you thought a photon goes through the slit and then through some Huygens mechanism creates a wave, it's one wave, and that's only one source. So your two slits are only two sources, and the fact is you have to explain a pattern that has to be explained with four sources. It's a four-source pattern. You can't make the four-source pattern with two sources. So the whole thing is just a lie.
Left slit. Right slit.
Didn't happen.
Another right slit. Left.
I mean, it's just a lie. This might as well be the Dr. Quantum religion, where religion is trying to seize control of quantum mechanics and say quantum mechanics proves the existence of God and proves that our brains are controlling reality. That's all this has become, and this is standard science. This is what's fed to children as the truth, and it's just a big fucking fat lie.
Slit. If we watched them all day long, the pattern would be random. About half would go through either slit.
So again, the whole thing could be figured out that their math is saying, what dimension do I care about? Do I care about the middle of the slit? Is that the dimension I'm going to use in the math? No. I'm going to use the surface dimensions. That's what I'm going to use in the math. So their own mathematics tells them it's not about a wave, because the wave would be in the center of that opening. That's the measurement you would make. It's from the center of that opening. So that's it's such an obvious lie. The math that works says what's the distance between that outer edge and the outer edge on the other side, because that's the unique feature of the double slit. When you bring two single slits together, it's not about this distance, it's about this distance. This outside distance is the new distance you're introducing. Here you have two distances, meaningless almost, two distances, nothing. Here you've created this new distance, and that's what makes the double slit different.
Wait a second. Where are the waves? Where's Young's interference pattern?
So as stated before, the two slits are less than a millimeter apart. They're not going to create blobs on the wall that are 2 feet apart. It ain't going to happen. This slit doesn't go over here and this slit send the light over there. It doesn't happen. These patterns would be right on top of each other. There'd be a tiny millimeter of difference in those two patterns. They'd be right on top of each other. So again, they can't even get the simplest part of the mechanics correct. They have to lie about all of it.
This is where the weird begins.
No, you already did the lie. So yeah, going from lie to weird, I guess, would be a reasonable expectation. If you're willing to lie, then I guess you're willing to weird.
I cannot explain to you what you're about to see. That's because no one on Earth understands it yet. If you can't live
they're so confident that they're right that they say they don't understand it. I mean, can this make any sense to you? They're saying we know it's made out of this wave stuff and we know it's waving ether thingy, blah blah blah, but we don't understand. Well, what do you mean you don't understand? You're telling us what it does. Is it a bent geodesic? Is it an actual force? I mean, you can't tell us anything. It's just so bad.
With that, then you're not going to be happy with what lies up ahead.
So there's no...
On the smallest possible scale that we've ever discovered, the quantum universe, the mere act of observation changes reality.
So this is just disgusting, okay? Because most of the other physicists will tell you observation is a fake word. Observation just means, from our classical way of observing, that light has to bang into a surface and reflect for us to see something. We have to use sonar or radar, or we actually throw tennis balls at something to find out if the wall's there. We can use sonar. We can use different things to detect something. And so that's an observation. In a sense, you're banging it with some sort of media. And the fact is everything's being hit by light all the time. Invisible radiation, infrared, radio waves, your cell phone calls, all of that stuff is constantly essentially taking a photograph. It's doing the same thing from the perspective of the thing in the universe. It doesn't care whether the energy that hits it goes into your eyeball. If it goes somewhere else, the picture was just the same to it. It got hit by the light. Whether the light goes into this stupid little fucking camera, okay, or the photons go there, doesn't change how much light hit me. And it's just ridiculous. So this isn't about a human observation. It's about the fact that the physical universe has interacted with something. And once it interacts, it has to have a set location, because the interaction has a definite cause and effect implication. where it interacts matters. It will create a different thing happening in the universe if it happens in a different location. So you've isolated where something exists. Every time a cell phone hits it, every time a piece of radiation, a bit of starlight, doesn't matter what radiation hits you, any radiation outs your location. You have a definite location. You can't have an indefinite location and have an interaction. Can't happen.
Okay, photons, keep on coming. This time, we promise not to look. You're not going to believe this.
So this is a non-existent experiment. Never happened. This is just complete preposterous fish story exaggeration. It just never happened. This is somebody calling a minnow a sea monster. I mean, it's just an insane, silly storytelling.
But we can change the pattern on the far wall simply by not watching which slit the photons pass through. I know it sounds crazy, but in every trial ever conducted, the outcome depends.
So it's just a lie. There's no trials, there's no outcomes, there's no real experiment that has anything to do with doing any of this bullshit of figuring out what slit something went through. It didn't happen. I mean, the experiment that they're even talking about, there's no two slits in front of the photon. The photon's first going into a crystal that turns it into two different photons of half the frequency. I mean, the whole thing is a completely different experiment. It's just such a lie.
Depends on whether or not the experiment was observed.
It's terrible. Terrible that he gets away with that lie. So this image is not photons. So he's been talking about photons. This isn't a photon image.
So the reason we didn't get the interference pattern earlier wasn't because we chopped up the light into single photons. It was because we were observing which slit the photons passed through.
So again, it didn't happen. Nobody observed it. There was no photon detectors. I mean, why do physicists allow somebody to do this to their science? I mean, all the physicists, anybody who's listened to a single physics lecture knows this isn't exactly how it happens, and this is not an accurate description of the science, and yet they let this guy get away with this horse shit.
But how can a photon know if someone is watching?
So that's the scary part, that he would even play with something that silly, that anybody's watching the photon, or that the photon is made of force, and physicists know forces really don't interact with forces. It doesn't happen. They need the conduit of matter. The only way one photon can know of another photon's existence is it has to hit a piece of matter and then have the other photon hit the piece of matter, and then the photons can interact with each other. But they can't interact without the medium of a material object to push. That's a fact. So this is just so bad. And people will curse me as some sort of pseudoscience, science denier, some kind of evil presence that I would dare say, oh, come on. You don't have to do, your science doesn't have to do better than this. It's again, I'm pointing out how the Eddington experiment was never successfully repeated out the margin of error from Earth, and they never even tried it from space. And it takes 5 minutes from space. You don't need an eclipse. And they have 400 times better resolution. And I haven't gotten one rational response from a single person defending conventional physics why that's good science. It's good science not to repeat that fundamental experiment. I mean, when the guy who did the original experiment said in his own journal, I got 10% of the data quality, and I certainly wouldn't stake my life on the results of this experiment because my data sucks. And that's the experiment that say we all have to believe it's the truth. And it's just so bad. So, I mean, it's like nobody cares about the truth, and science shouldn't be about the truth. It should just be about telling some kind of wooey story. about fake entanglements and fake superpositions and fake antimatter and fake anti-energy and fake, all this fake crap. And you're all such a huge disappointment that you're all so dupey and gullible. I don't know which one you're worse, right? Are you just fans? Are you just little minions? I don't even, are you really gooey for this crap? And this is science porn to you? These little fake stories? It gets you off in some way to hear somebody talk about all this magical little crap? Or are you just really, really frickin' dumb? Which I don't know which one you are. Whether you're a jerk for this junk or whether you're just too stupid to tell the difference between a sensible, accurate description of reality and a preposterous pile of shit. So anyway, fuck. Yeah, it's not, what can I say? I have to do this for years and years and years and years. I have to point out something just so damn fucking obvious. There's perfectly reasonable explanations for the stupid double slit pattern, and you jackasses just don't want to hear it. I just saw this one. Light, a wave, or a particle. Oh dear, Fermilab. He probably makes a terrible mess of it too. Somebody will do that next time.
Quantum mechanics is probably the most mind-blowing theory.
See all this hypey talk. He's got his little blackboard behind him. So the universe is doing all of this complex stuff. So the universe, the little tiny electrons have all kinds of properties, and they're doing all kinds of fancy stuff, and all the little force bits are all so complicated. They all have personalities, and they're up, down, strange, weird, fucktarded, all kinds of different kinds, and they're all doing different motors, and they're all running different things. Some have big sails, some have little rocket engines, some have little square wheels, blah, 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 blah. It's all this fucking nonsense. These idiots. Damn. So, there's not much to say. It's just very disappointing living on this planet. Very disappointing. But I must endeavor to persevere. I think I must. I probably have to rethink that. I probably don't need to endeavor to persevere. Because you're belligerent in your stupidity and ignorance. And it will not be cured.